I guess I can. I was born in 1936, and so I guess I must have entered school then about 1942, I suppose, somewhere in there. And my folks lived on Omaha Street, 2 houses up from West Boulevard, right in the area where the Interstate Bank is at the present time. Yes, right here.
Wow.
Yeah. And this was a residential neighborhood. And there were houses along Rapid Street, which is the street to the south of this building. And then right running parallel with Rapid Street on the south side was railroad tracks. And that building there was the roundhouse for the railroad that primarily traveled from Rapid City to where Pactola Lake is nowadays, up Mountain View Road, past Canyon Lake, and up into the hills. And Omaha Street was a residential street. It was fairly wide, and on the south side that we lived on was small homes, 1 and 2 bedroom homes, mostly detached garages. And across the street on the north side, where some of the businesses are today, there were bigger homes with big lots and the huge cottonwood trees that you see a few of. Now, Omaha Street in that period of time turned at 11th Street and went across the creek to Warren Lamb Sawmill. And so there was heavy traffic on that portion of Omaha because it was traffic to the sawmill. Unfinished, uncut trees were brought in there and transformed into lumber, and then it was carried out. And Omaha Street didn't go through. See, it stopped at 11th Street. In that area, let's see, what would be in that area? Like where the volleyball courts and that was just kind of a no man's land. But there was in that area, the lumber company had 2 or 3 houses, small houses, that they rented out to workers in the sawmill. And on the sawmill site itself was a company store that you hear so much about. And almost all those people worked in the lumber yard and bought all their groceries and traded at the company store.
So the processing plant moved in way later.
At a later time, and it was more to the south and west of where the lumber company was. Now, the pond that's on the golf course right now, there was a pond there in that time period, and that's where they dropped the trees off, and so it was the old-fashioned where they had individuals that walked the logs with big poles and guided them into where the start of processing the lumber.
I had no idea.
So, yeah.
And so what school did you go to?
I went to the elementary school, Lincoln Elementary, on the corner of 9th and St. Joe. And that was just grades 1 through 2.
And after that?
And after that, I went to the Washington Grade School, which is the one, of course, on 7th Street at the top of the hill, and that was grades 3 through 6.
And from Washington, did you go to the Coolidge building?
I went to the Coolidge building. That was primarily, that time, that was primarily a junior high school, so to speak. And so you went grades 6, 7, and 8, 7 and 8. And, part of your 9th grade year probably, there's movement back and forth. But there's a hallway between the Coolidge building and Rapid City High School on 2 floors. not all 3 floors. And so that's where students passed. And sometimes, one of your classes may have been in the high school building, and at other times, high schoolers were in that Coolidge building.
I've heard that the creakiness of the wood and the gym, it was really a loud building because of the wooden insides.
Well, it probably could have been. And, the gym in that Coolidge building that time was a wooden floor. But, they were pretty primitive compared to what you find in gymnasiums today. And there was a running track around the top of it. And, the whole building kind of creaked, to be truthful, yeah.
And so then you would have gone to high school, right, in the Rapid City High School building that was maybe 10 years old by the time you were there?
Well, evidently it was. I didn't realize it was that new, but yes. So.
Do you have any specific memories of, and because you came back and you taught, and so did you teach in that building?
I did, in a very unique circumstance. As I said, I was teaching in the Washington building when it was set on fire. And after the fire, the school board and the city fathers got together, and they looked at how fast the Washington building had burned, and they looked at the Coolidge building and decided that it was no longer safe to keep that number of students in the building. So they decided to tear it down. But see, right at that point is when Stevens High School opened. And so it just been maybe about a year after the fire, or that Stevens opened. So there were fewer students. But Bill Mitchell, who was the principal of Rapid City High School, was bound determined to keep Rapid City Central High School together with all the staff that he had built and all the students that would have normally attended the complex with the Coolidge building and the Washington building. And so he was trying to decide how he's going to do this when he lost 2 buildings. And so I was teaching American history. That was a junior required subject in that time period. And there was 3 other instructors that taught American history because, of course, your classes were big in that. Not only the individual classes, but the junior class was a large class. And so he called the 4 of us into the office and said that he was trying to find room to keep all the students that were originally at Rapid City High School, Central High School then, see, there was that factor of the pride of Central High School, together, and he is wondering if we could teach American history in the auditorium. And so we said that we would give it some thought, and we put our heads together and decided that we were going to teach it like a college course. And so we went back to him and we said, yes, we think we can do that, but we're going to need some things to do that. And because one of the features of it will be large group lectures. And so all the American history classes were scheduled into the auditorium. And that was approximately 4 classes a day. So that would meant between 120 to 150 students in there a period. And so he said, well, one thing we'll do to help you out is we'll give you a full-time secretary. And so one of the dressing rooms there we built into a teacher's office, or transformed into a teacher's office. And there was 4 of us there and a secretary. And we built a syllabus for American history, just like a college syllabus, where every day there was an assignment on that syllabus, a reading assignment or what have you. And we had what we called large group lectures, and that's where one of us would lecture to the whole 120 or 30 kids at one time, and one of the teachers would sit in the back of the room and monitor anyone that came in late. and the other two teachers were in the office preparing their lectures for the next day or so, or building tests. And so we put that syllabus together, handed it out. It accounted for every day of the semester, what the topic was, what the pages in their textbook was, and any other special features. And so we would lecture, and they gave us overhead projectors and things like that to work with. And so we taught that just like a college course would have been taught, except instead of one instructor, there was four. And we rotated putting lectures together. And because we had so many kids in there at one time, we had some fun things. For example, at one point when we were dealing with the Civil War, we said we're going to have a debate. The teachers are going to take the position of pro-slavery, and the students will have the opportunity to be against slavery. And we'll have a regular debate up on because the stage was in there, that was the auditorium, the theater. So, and of course the students, if you have 150 kids in one period, you have some really sharp, 8 or 10 really sharp kids. Plus they got all their support from all of their classmates. And they thought, well, how are those guys ever going to defend slavery, And so then this was usually done before a holiday or something, for a change of pace, that type of thing. And so we would debate, but we kept telling them, you got to remember, this is not 1950 or 60, 70. It was, 1860s. And what people knew about things in those days, and so the two or three of the teachers would take pro-slavery, and the students would anti-slavery, and we had fun debates because we would quote the Bible to them and everything else, because we had time to do that and prepare that, and the kids learned that it was a different setting then than the present time. So that was just one example of things that we did.
Who were the other social studies teachers at the time?
Okay, there was Bill Robinson, who was also the head track coach at Central at that time. And his father was Duane Robinson, the state historian, so he had a tremendous background. Jim Osborne, who was originally from Phillip and had majored in history at the University of South Dakota and was had quite a historical background. And then we had a rookie, Kurt Moses, who was the son of the tailor here in Rapid City, who was just out his first or second year of teaching, but, was an avid reader and studied history. And then myself, and I had a history major in college. And so we were the four in there at that time. And so we, of course, those chairs in that auditorium did not have any desks or armrests. Well, they had armrests, but not desks. And so Dr. Mitchell took masonite in the shop, cut lap boards so that the kids had something to write on. So they got accustomed to coming in, picking up their lap board, going. They had assigned seats. We took roll like you normally did, and we would proceed with whatever the lesson was that day. I had, at one time, I was assigned the lecture, The Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So I compared the stage and the balcony of the auditorium in that setting to the theater that Lincoln was in, and how far John Wilkes Booth had to jump to get to the stage and so on. So I guess to make a long story short, whenever I run into an individual nowadays and they say, I had you for history, the first thing I ask them, was it in the auditorium? And 9 times out of 10, it was. They really remember that experience. And there was a lot of them that came back to us and said that really actually prepared us for for college and dealing with a setting like that, So then we had guest speakers, and there were some headliners. Spiro Agnew was in town, and he spoke, because we already had the kids there. They were already seated and in class, They come Spiro Agnew, George McGovern, Dennis Banks. Let's see, I'm trying to think of who else, what other politicians. But, in the campaign period of time when they're going around, they want to speak to groups, and they like to speak to high school groups. Yeah, we had those individuals in, plus people from the community that were familiar with Rapid City history and that type of thing. So it turned out to be quite a success.
And if I understand correctly, at the time that Rapid City High School, Coolidge, and Washington all were the central complex, the history department was in the Washington section.
For the most part, yeah. Yeah.
Did you get evacuated that day?
On the day of the fire, when the alarm went off, we were all in class in the Washington building. And in the middle of that building, as you can see from the picture there, was a small gym. And that was a study hall, but I don't think it was a supervised study hall. I can't remember, because I remember when the alarm went off and, you're kind of herding the kids out of the room, and they had to go west out of the building. They kind of diddle-daddle, because they're used to fire drills and that. And I can remember I stuck my head into that gym area to make sure there was no kids in there. And I said casually to some of them, we need to get going here. You never know when one of these things are going to be real. And we walked out on those steps there, and we could see the smoke pouring over our head, because that's how fast that building went, because the fire was started actually in the east end of the ceiling. Kids got up into the attic there out of what was a nurse's room or some type of special room in that area. So
I've read that they could get into this attic space, and I saw in a couple of posts on the Facebook, that they could do that for many years in the 60s. And so I thought it was funny, because as a kid you'd want to go out, hide out and ditch class a little bit.
Evidently there was a group, and they to be kind of truthful, they probably weren't the most committed to education, that type of kid. And evidently from time to time they were crawling up in there. And evidently this particular 2 or 3 boys crawled up in there, and evidently probably with smoking, most likely. And that fire broke out.
Crazy. I know also that until the mid-'60s, at least, Coach Cobb was still around. And as I was a cobbler, and I never, in the early 2000s, late 90s, I didn't have a clue that Coach Cobb was a real person. And so
really,
I was like, a shoemaker? Why are we the shoemakers?
It is kind of funny that's that association. In fact, I graduated from Rapid City High School in 1954, and our yearbook is a cobbler dividing the sections. They show the cobbler making shoes, and then in that setting, as whether it was faculty or students or what have you, and it really didn't fit. Coach Cobb came to Rapid City, I believe, in 1920. You agree with that date, or is that the date you came across?
I know that he's in the 1924 yearbook as an instructor.
Well, I think he came from Illinois, if I remember correctly. Yeah, he came from Illinois, and I think it was 1920. If it wasn't, it was right in there, 1920, 21, 22. And he coached there was 3 sports then: football, basketball, and track. And he was basically, for a lot of that time, the only coach. And at that time, Rapid City wasn't too much bigger than Sturgis or Balfouche or Lead. And so the Rapid City High School played those schools in all sports. Well, when I say all sports, again, it was only males, and it was only football, basketball, and track. And Cobb had an unbelievable record, coaching record, because he was really a tough taskmaster. And he was I don't know what word I'd use to describe him, but he was pretty single-minded and focused, I guess would be, and so he was the coach 3 sports and was the AD, and I don't have any idea. I've never looked back in those yearbooks as to whether he had any assistant coaches or that. But by the time I got there in 1954, I graduated in 54. I started high school in 1950, then in ninth grade, I guess. By the time I got there, the head football coach was Wes Evans, and the head basketball coach was Rudy Soderquist, and Cobb was the head track coach and athletic director. And he taught physical education. And in those physical education classes, the way he maintained discipline, and I don't know if I should tell you this or not, the way he maintained discipline a lot was there was a number of Native American boys in those classes, and in that time, Rapid City had a high-powered boxing program, independent of the schools, of course, and those boxers were primarily Native Americans, and they were winning golden gloves all over the place. And so if you misbehaved in class, one way Cobb disciplined you was you had to put on the gloves and box one of those guys. So he had he had your attention 100% all the time. So, and it kind of reflects the type of guy he was,
That's really interesting.
And the other thing about him was if you were on the wrong side, of Coach Cobb, the way you knew that you were in big trouble was he'd come up to you and he'd say, "Okay, star," and that meant you were anything but a star, and that meant that you were in trouble. And so it's interesting in the years I was there, they did have boys intramurals in the third floor gym, and Cobb ran those. And when the intramurals were on, nobody else was on the floor. And the varsity basketball players could come in. Their practices were after the intramural basketball. And so you could come in and watch. But if you stepped on that floor for any reason, wow, you were in trouble, It was okay, star, you're out of here. And that meant you could have been the star of the basketball team. Excuse me, you would have to wait out in the hallway till intramurals was over before you could go in and get dressed for practice. But he was a very interesting man, and I got to know him. Excuse me. When I came back to teach at Rapid City High School, I got to know him a little bit, and in those days, the planning period for coaches was the last period of the day. And when he retired, he would come up to the faculty lounge that last period because he knew the coaches were in there, and he liked to, talk and shoot bull with the coaches, and so one day I was in there when he came in, and we were talking, and I said, "Coach, you coached a lot of great athletes. Who were the best 2 athletes you ever coached?" And he didn't hesitate at all. he said, first of all is Leroy Chief Miller. And I said, Leroy Chief Miller. And he said, yeah. And he said he was a football player, a basketball player, a great track athlete, and he was a great swimmer. And swimmer, why is he talking about swimming? And then he said the second one was his in the same time period was Billy Duncan. And he said Billy Duncan was a good football player, basketball player, track, and he also was a good swimmer and driver. Well, that didn't quite all make sense to me, but they were all in school in the late 1930s, about 36, 37, 38 in there, maybe a little later than that. I've always been going to go to Rapid City High School and look it up in the yearbook, find out the exact dates. But so the story goes that when Duncan and Miller were freshmen, Coach Cobb brought them up to the varsity football team. And in one of they played about one or two games, and the team had not been playing well, doing well. And, he lost very few games in the years he was the head football coach. I could bring you the records. It's unbelievable. And so the next game coming up was Sioux Falls, Washington. And so he decided that he was going to start a freshman, Billy Duncan, at quarterback, and Leroy Miller at running back, what we would call running back today. It was fullback then. And they lost to Washington that game by a touchdown or two, but they were only freshmen then, see. So evidently, and I've never verified this, but I believe the next 3 years they went undefeated as sophomores through seniors. And the swimming part of it was, in that day and age, Rapid City had a swim team in the summer. Where did they practice? There was no swimming pools. They practiced at Canyon Lake. And every year they had a big swim meet at Canyon Lake. And in South Dakota, every year they had a South Dakota State Championship swim meet somewhere in South Dakota. And when those boys were seniors, Rapid City won the state swimming championship, and Duncan and Miller won the diving competition, plus they were on the relay teams and the individual events. To make a long story short, that was right at the beginning of World War II. And by the way, Leroy Miller, if you can believe it, it was the journal that gave him the name Chief. He was Native American, nice-looking kid. And, you probably would have never gotten away with that in later years, but the press jumped right on that, Leroy Chief Miller. Well, I think maybe he even left school early. I don't know that for sure, high school early, because a lot of those young men did that and joined the service. So what branch of the service did he join? The frogmen. And he was in the World War II in the Navy as a frogman. And when he mustered out, he settled in Seattle, Washington. Well, I don't know how many years ago we inducted him into the Rapid City Sports Hall of Fame. And his two boys, he was no longer living, of course, his two boys came for that. It was the neatest thing. But another interesting part of that story is, and how we got on to where his family was and that to begin with. Are you familiar with the name Steve Withorn? Maybe. Steve Withorn was a great athlete in the 1960s for Rapid City High School, Native American, about 6'3", 6'4", broad shoulders down to a slim waist, and he was an outstanding football player, basketball player at Rapid City High School in the last years before the school split. In fact, In fact, he was there when the school split because his junior year, they won the state championship. That was one of the first state championships, or that was the first state championship that Dave Strain won at Rapid City High School. And Steve Withhorn, Jack Tennyson, and Rich Gary were all juniors on that team. And the next year, the schools split, and those three were at Rapid City High School then. And that's when I moved from South Junior High to high school, and I was an assistant to Dave then. And they were on that team. And they lucked to repeat, but we got beat in the first game of the state basketball tournament by Lincoln High School in that day and age. But Steve Withhorn went on to be a basketball referee, and he's in the Rapid City Sports Hall of Fame and the South Dakota Sports Hall of Fame for his officiating, and had a great career. He died early, and I can't remember the cause of it. And Rich Gary, who was the guard on that team, went on and played at South Dakota State, and I'm sure he's one of the first Rapid City kids to ever play regularly at state in basketball. And he went on and became an expert in, I think, managing hospitals. And he ended up in Minnesota at a large, well, first he was in Phoenix, Arizona, or that area, and he came back and managed, there was having a problem with the hospital in Minnesota, I forget what community, and so he came back and worked at that hospital for a period of time. Since then, he's retired, and I think he's bought a small farm near Huron, South Dakota. And he was an outstanding individual. And Jack Tennyson, his dad had what kind of business would it be? Dealt with cars and that. And Jack worked in that business and took over that business, and he died at an early age also. So that's a little bit part of that. That doesn't help you much with the building, but...
Well, it kind of funnels into the divide that Stevens being built kind of caused between Rapid City, and so I was glad to hear that those three got to stay together.
Yeah, well, see, and they had the choice that finally the seniors had a choice to go to Stevens or to Central, and John Quisla, who lived on the west side of town, chose to go to Central at that time also, and so he was on that team. And but if I remember right, he was injured a little bit near the end of the season. But anyhow, it was just Lincoln was a good basketball team also. But
I think my last question, because Coach Cobb would have been there into the 70s, and so in 68, the cheerleaders passed away. In 70, the fire, and then 72, the flood. And I saw a picture, Coach Cobb was still around in 73.
But he wasn't employed by the district then.
I don't think so, no.
No, I'm positive that, because the year the cheerleaders had the tragic accident, Bill Mitchell was the activities director or athletic director at Rapid City High School. And I'm not even sure. No, he wasn't. I'm not even sure of that. You'd have to verify that. See, when the schools split, Bill Mitchell had been the head basketball coach at Rapid City High School for quite a while, and then he gave up that position to become the athletic director at Rapid City High School. And Howard Nas became the head football coach there. And there's a lot of different individuals in the Dave Strain was the basketball coach then. And so at the time of the fire, Mitchell was the principal, and Howard Nas was the athletic director.
Where did they practice the football from Rapid City High School? Was it at Wilson?
No. Excuse me, I got a little frog in my throat there. When I was in Does it want to go away?
I could grab a tissue too. I don't know where they are, but I could find one.
I might have a cough drop here. I carry them because I get that once in a while. Okay, go back. When I was in high school, the Cobblers practiced football at that field behind where that parking lot is now, behind that building now. It was larger than that, and it came down into there, and it was grass, but it wasn't very big. The kids that were in the junior high program walked all the way through town to Northside Field, which is where the practice football field is for Rapid City High School now. And when I was in elementary school, Rapid City High School, that would be the late 30s, played their football games on Friday afternoon on the north side field. And it was right, there was a street that ran through there where their practice field is now. And there was houses on the south side of that street, not very many, but a few. And then there was the football field, and the bleachers were tall wooden bleachers they boarded up the back. And so, and then there was a big fence around it. But there was such a big fence, and it wasn't very good. When I was in grade school, if I got out of class in time and hustled, I could get down there, and you could crawl into the fence anywhere and see a game. And it wasn't until the early 1940s that Rapid City High School began to play their varsity games at South Dakota Tech. See, and I think I was one of the first ones they played there because my uncle, who owned a bakery in town, asked my dad and I if we wanted to go to the football game. And he said Friday night, and I couldn't visualize that. Friday night, how are they going to play a football game Friday night, And so, of course, we said, sure, we'd love to go. So he picked us up. We got down to the tech field where it is now and kind of set up the same way with those ramps. And you won't believe this, my uncle owned a bakery, but they put me in the trunk of the car, drove in, parked in one of the parking spaces. It's like going to the drive-in movie. Then they opened the trunk and I got out. Here's all these lights. And that's when they started to play at Tech. Later on, when this field wasn't working, and I'm not for sure what was happening where Rapid City High School is now, they bussed the kids out to Sioux Park. And that's where they practiced. They bussed them out. And where that field is now, Coach Cobb was the one that obtained that from the government, that access to that piece of land, and they put in a football field but no bleachers, just 4 light poles from some old light poles that they drug in from somewhere, and they put some lights on them, but they weren't very bright. But that's where Rapid City High School practiced. They bussed them out there. And the junior high kids walked right through town. Can you imagine that nowadays? In their football, you dressed in the gym, Coolidge Gym, and walked right through town with your gear on, practiced Northside Field. Obviously, you didn't practice very long. They got you back there, and you got dressed and went home.
Kind of like South Middle School right now is practicing at my school, South Park, because of the construction there. They're
that's why they're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering.
Yeah, they come over and they're all dressed out and head back.
Yeah.
But that's a much shorter
distance, yeah, So Rapid City has not been very good at, economically, it was the thing to do to share with Tech. But, we got 2 high schools the size of ours, and we don't have a public school stadium. And Tech, has moved up in classification and trying to build a more high-powered program. and I know it's the high schools have less access to it.